Bob Walter was there, yes.
Was Tom Allen and Tommy Dunn present?
I can't remember. It was very seldom that everybody was there. Sometimes Tommy would be there, sometimes Tom Allen would be there, sometimes Cindy would be there, and occasionally all of us would be there. So I can't say exactly which meetings everybody was there at all times. A lot of times everybody couldn't be there. They'd have to have something going on.
And there were, in fact, discussions about providing or giving instructions to Mr. Preston that he wouldn't be able to abide by, were there not?
I don't understand that question.
Okay. Did the group that was meeting discuss during the Did the group that was meeting during the material time period ever discuss the concept of giving directions to Mr. Preston that they knew he would not abide by?
He was going to be given a guideline, yes, about how we wanted the county government to function as far as opening up the county for transparency. So I guess the answer would be yes.
During the material time period, the material time period we're talking about, you know that.
Define it for me.
We did define it, remember? June of 2008 through December of 2008.
Okay.
And you understand that we're talking about the meetings that occurred primarily at Bob Waldrop's office during that period of time?
Yeah.
And you further understand that we're talking about Joey Preston, who is the sitting county administrator during that period of time.
Uh-huh.
Is that a yes?
Yes, it is, yes.
And what we were talking about was the substance of conversations that may have occurred between the group at Mr. Waldrop's office about Mr. Preston's employment as a county administrator, right? Do you understand that?
Yes.
The question I had that Mr. Devlin thought was vague and ambiguous was, did discussions ever occur where the idea or notion of giving Mr. Preston some sort of instruction as a county administrator, which would have originated from the county council, that he could not obey? Do you recall conversations along those lines?
I would see no problem with him obeying what we were talking about.
That's not the question I asked you. Do you recall conversations where it was discussed that the new council of January 2009 would ultimately give Joey Preston employment instructions that they knew he would not be able to comply with?
I don't know how else to answer. We talked about giving instructions about how we wanted to run the county government. If he did not go along with the instructions we gave him, it's a sure fact that he probably would not be the county administrator anymore.
I understand your testimony about that. I'm asking you a different question. I'm asking you questions about job instructions that Joey Preston would not be able to comply with. Were there ever discussions where they were talking about job instructions that they knew Joey Preston couldn't comply with, wouldn't be capable of doing that, so they could replace him as county administrator?
I really don't know how to answer that because I just answered it.
Can you answer my question, though?
No.
No, you don't recall that?
No. No.
Can you answer my question?
Like I said, we give him instructions that we were going to give him. If he didn't follow it, he probably would not be the county administrator anymore.
Let me show you what we'll mark as Deposition Exhibit 11. Is this an email from you to Tom Beckwith?
Yes.
Did you author it?
Yes, I did.
Do you see the sentence that says, and I quote, "Everything we'll be discussing will be of the utmost," and I assume you mean confidence there, but it says confidential between us, end quote.
Yes.
What were you discussing that needed to be held in the utmost confidence?
He had a daughter, I guess, that works for the county. And he wanted to make sure there wasn't going to be any kind of retaliatory efforts. I think she worked at the county at that time.
Presumably you're referring to Mr. Preston?
Yes.
What would Mr. Preston be retaliating against Tom Beckwith for?
If he was trying to help the new council members get off to a good foot because he had a vast knowledge of controlling a large business in Anderson. And that's what we're talking to him about. We were asking him about it.
Well, your testimony was there was some concern about Mr. Preston being punitive towards Tom Beckwith, correct?
Uh-huh.
And I thought I understood your testimony to be that the concern was that Mr. Preston would have some sort of grudge if Beckwith helped the new county council members, the ones that were coming in January of 2009. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was it that caused you to conclude that Mr. Preston would have an objection if Tom Beckwith wanted to help the incoming county council members deal with whatever they wanted to deal with?
Mr. Beckwith asked for confidentiality, so I was honoring his request.
Did he explain why?
I don't recall him explaining, going into my great details about it, but he just wanted it confidential.
The next sentence you wrote, and I quote, "I understand how vindictive JP can be," end quote. Do you see that?
Uh-huh.
When I asked you about your interactions with Mr. Preston, you told me that he invited you to county council and toured you around, right?
Yes.
And that when he did, he was completely polite to you.
I was going to be his boss.
But he was completely polite to you, was he not?
Yes.
And prior to that point in time, can you cite to me any example where he personally was vindictive towards you?
No.
I'll show you what we'll mark as Exhibit 12. Okay, this is where Mr. Devlin is talking, so I'll be Mr. Devlin, his attorney. We're going to take a brief detour and revisit something that was discussed earlier in the deposition. I'm going to ask you one or two questions, Mr. Moore. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. You were asked a question earlier today by Mr. Davis as to whether or not you had reviewed any documents in preparation for this deposition. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
Do you remember meeting with me and Mr. Gibson and several other lawyers last night?
Yes.
Do you remember looking at documents while we did that?
Yes.
So your testimony would be, yes, you did look at the documents while in the presence of counsel.
That's right.
That's all I have, Lane. Okay, examination resumed by Mr. Davis. Mr. Moore, I'd like to turn your attention to deposition exhibit number 12. Page 1 of that exhibit, an email from your home account to your work account. Does it carbon copy an email address of thomas9976@charter.net?
Yeah.
I'll represent to you that during this deposition, Mr. Allen confirmed that that was his email address.
Okay. Okay.
What I would like to do is turn your attention to page 2. Did you write page 2?
I wrote the original draft. I did.
Were they your thoughts and words?
Yes.
What was the excerpt reflected on FE 100176 intended to be used for?
This was a guideline for us to go by to choose an audit firm to audit Anderson County finances, the finance department.
So what was this supposed to be for?
Just to set up the parameters on what we wanted to do with an audit and how to set it up for guidelines.
Do you recall at any point that Mr. Waldrop may have provided these remarks during a work session of Anderson County Council?
Yes, Mr. Waldrop was given this, and they had a work session in the Anderson County Library. And as well as I remember, he presented this at the work session.
Did Mr. Waldrop either deliver these remarks verbatim or in a substantively verbatim way?
Best I can remember, he pretty much read this down and discussed it.
Let's start with the third sentence of the paragraph on top. It says, and I quote, "The new council will include members that have the experience and understand what is required of an audit, period. You have a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel, construction engineer, and a highly respected local building contractor, each with a world of experience," end quote. Do you see that?
Let's see. Oh, okay, up at top, yeah.
Were you the individual who you were referring to as the construction engineer?
At that time, I was construction engineer on a job site, a field engineer, like I said.
So yes, you were the person that was being referred to as construction engineer.
Yes.
These were remarks that were intended to be delivered at a formal meeting of record in the state of South Carolina, correct?
It's given to Mr. Waldrop, and he was going to do it at that meeting, and that's when he read this off.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
These were intended to be delivered at a meeting of record in South Carolina.
Yeah.
In bullet point 3, down below, the recommendation is, and I quote, "The administrator and financial director would be placed on paid leave, period. They should be readily available to answer any questions should that become necessary, period. The administrator and financial director would be prohibited from any contact with county employees during this procedure, period," end quotation. Do you see that?
Yes.
Before authoring this excerpt, did you consult with anyone or seek any legal counsel as to what process might be required prior to putting a county administrator on either paid or unpaid leave?
I basically wrote it up and gave it to Mr. Waldrop for him to critique it on the legality of it.
Did you retain Mr. Waldrop with respect to the legalities of your comments as reflected in FE 100176? I'll remind you that I've already deposed Mr. Waldrop.
No.
Mr. Moore, did you send this particular document to Mr. Waldrop?
Yes.
Okay. And when you sent this particular document to Mr. Waldrop, did you carbon copy anybody on it?
Tom Allen.
Let's look at the next exhibit. Mr. Moore, is this an email from you to WAIM Radio, which would be Rick Driver and Jenna Trammell, dated August 4th of 2008?
Yes.
Does it forward the remarks that you drafted that were ultimately delivered by Bob Waldrop, in which we just spoke about?
Yes.
Why are you sending this draft excerpt to Rick Driver and Jenna Trammell on August 4th, 2008?
That might have been the day they had the meeting at the library. This may have been the day they had the meeting. I'd have to go back and look at the calendar, but it was happening about that time. It would have been public record.
And it's true, is it not, that Rick Driver ultimately read your draft remarks on the radio?
I can't say that because I don't listen to him if I'm at work.
Would it surprise you if that occurred?
No.
I have a question. Do you see where it says, condensed version, ... quote, I have to take what chance I have, end quote. Do you see that?
Yeah.
The next sentence you wrote, and I quote, it should shake up the apple cart, end quote. Was that your objective?
My objective was to do a good procedure and get a good audit and accounting.
Under the proposed procedure that you were suggesting, you would put Joey Preston on administrative leave, and he would be prohibited from any further contact with county employees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Moore, is Exhibit 14 an email from you to Jenna Trammell?
Yes, it is.
Is it dated August 4th of 2008 at 10:26 a.m.?
Yes.
The first question I have for you about this document, when you say, and I quote, everything you do for me is confidential, end quote. What was it that Jenna Trammell was doing for you that was being kept confidential?
She proofread any of my ads or anything. She proofread and checked the grammatic because she was an English major.
Did she also help you draft things?
No, not really. She just proofread it for errors.
Did she write articles that helped advance the audit that you were advocating for?
She wrote a lot of articles. I didn't read all of them, so I can't say exactly what all she wrote, but she did write a lot of articles. A lot of them were about audits.
In fact, with respect to the articles that were published in a newspaper, she sent you each and every one of them before she published them, didn't she?
Are you saying she thanked us?
No, she sent them to you before she published them.
I think so, yes.
The next sentence there states, and I quote, hopefully we can get him run out of Anderson County soon and you can return, end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
It is true, is it not, that you are referring to Joey Preston?
Yes.
Can we agree that you had an intent to try to run Joey Preston out of Anderson County?
If he didn't conform to transparency, yes.
Now, does your sentence say if Joey Preston doesn't conform to transparency, hopefully we can get him run out of Anderson County soon?
No.
What you say is, hopefully you can get him run out of Anderson County soon, right?
Yes.
Was this inaccurate?
It states in the item 13 you gave me what we're going to do. It didn't say anything about running off Joey Preston.
Well, in the exhibit we're looking at now, it does though, doesn't it?
Yes.
Do you see how that might cause a reasonable person to conclude that you were advocating to put him on leave so you could run him out of Anderson County?
Maybe.
The last sentence that you have there, you write, quote, we miss talking with you personally, end quote. First question I have about that sentence is this, who is we?
She talked to a lot of people. She talked to Cindy Wilson a lot, and I don't know what other council members. But I know she talked with Cindy, and she talked with me a few times.
And then you sign it as, and I quote, your friend Eddie, end quote. Is that right?
Yes.
At the beginning of this deposition, I asked you, well, what was your relationship with Jenna Trammell? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And that time you said, well, she was just a reporter who wrote some articles about me. Do you remember that?
Yes.
But in fact, she was your friend, wasn't she?
She helped me out with a lot of reports, so yes, I guess you could say that, yeah.
She was an individual that you missed talking to personally, right?
Yes.
That's what this email says?
Yes.
When you told me this morning she was just a reporter, that wasn't true, was it?
She was just a reporter in most of the incidents you're talking about, yes. But she's a friend. She helped me out on reading the items that I wrote.
Can we agree that Jenna Trammell was more than just a reporter to you?
She's a friend.
In what way was Miss Trammell somehow in jeopardy?
She was terrified of Mr. Preston.
Did she ever tell you why?
She did not go into details with me about it. She was just scared of him.
Have you ever been to Cindy Wilson's house?
Yes.
Does she live on a farm?
She's got a few acres where her house is, but there is, I wouldn't say it's a farm.
I'm assuming there's a public road that goes somewhere near her house.
Yeah.
Does her driveway connect out to that road?
Yeah.
How far is her home situated from the road?
Maybe a mile, maybe a half mile or so.
Let me show you the next exhibit, Exhibit 15. Is this an email from Jenna Trammell to you, dated August 4th, 2008?
Uh-huh.
In this email, does Ms. Trammell indicate, and I quote, "I am really fearful of JP. I stayed at Cindy's house for 2 weeks back in March, and we were constantly looking out the windows and worrying that someone was spying on us," end quote. Do you see that?
Yes.
How far did you say Cindy's house is from the road?
Her house? The road in front of her house is probably 50 yards, and that road goes out to the main road, which is about a mile off the main road. You're talking about a main road, it's about a mile off the main road. Just the street that drives in front of her house, she's probably 50, 75 yards off the road, a little small street.
Are you aware of the circumstances under which Jenna Trammell was terminated from Anderson University?
I really don't know anything about Jenna Trammell that much except on what she wrote. I know she worked at Anderson College, and I know that she doesn't work there now, but I don't know any of the details. I really don't know her personal business. We really were not that close.
But this email is consistent with your earlier testimony that Cindy and Jenna were friends, right?
Yes.
Is this an email from you dated August 5th, 2008 to Holt Hopkins?
That's correct.
Who is Holt Hopkins?
Holt Hopkins is over the Transportation, Roads, and Bridges Department. Right now, he currently holds the Assistant Administrator position.
Now it's true, is it not, that the reason you want to take this tour at this point in time is because you haven't yet been sworn in?
That's correct.
And what would happen after you get sworn in?
After permission of the administrator.
As I understand it, and I'm asking you to correct me if I'm wrong, the way the county administrator government and how it works here was the employees reported to the county administrator, and then the county administrator reported to county council. And the county council prescribed policy and direct to the county administrator, and it would go back down, and he would direct the employees as to how to further that policy. Is that your understanding too?
Yes.
The last sentence in your email here to Mr. Holt Hopkins says, and I quote, "Anything you tell me will be held in strict confidential manner." I am assuming you meant manner, end quote. What do you believe, or what prompted you to offer confidentiality to Holt Hopkins with respect to an upcoming meeting that you were planning on having with him?
Being as a council-elect, I just didn't want him to be put in a situation that he was talking to us and get him in any kind of jeopardy with his job. So that's the reason I said that. I didn't want any kind of retaliatory measure against him if there could possibly be any. If he had any questions, he wanted to ask me about county council. At that time, I was nothing more than a citizen, so I could talk to him without a problem.
Mr. Moore, when we went off the record, we were talking about Deposition Exhibit 17. Is this an email from you to Rick Driver at an address of suthrnboy@charter.net?
Uh-huh.
Is that a yes?
Pardon?
Is that a yes?
Yes.
Who is suthrnboy@charter.net?
It's Stan Welch.
Stan Welch was a reporter, right?
Yes.
And the other one was Rick Driver?
Yes.
Can I ask you, why are you discussing audit procedures with a radio announcer and a newspaper reporter?
They were trying to understand the Green, Finney, and Horton. I think that was on the agenda, and I was explaining to them about summary and stuff.
In the second paragraph it says, and I quote, "I'm going to list what we normally start out with in an audit scope. This is only part of one that I have been associated with in the past few years and is only partial," end quote. Do you see that?
Yeah.
What audits are you associated with?
When I was at Floor, we'd go into different jobs and audit the job site. One I was really involved with was one in Kuwait. We went in the material and stuff like that and audited the job. And I did the man hours was my portion of it as far as doing material takeoff to see if everything was right and just make sure there wasn't any double dipping on stuff and things like that. It's been a few years ago.
You said that your portion of it was the man hours.
Man hours and piping, construction materials, stuff like that, checking different construction materials on the job.
With respect to your portion, what were the financial components?
It was a $10 billion job, and my part of it, I guess, as far as piping, was probably one of the largest parts of it. It was in the millions.
Give me for example, as to some of the things that you would look at.
Material costs.
For what type of materials?
Piping, it could be finishing out buildings, lumber, just everything. Anything to do with that construction materials that goes into the building. Plant, tanks, equipment, pipes, electrical.
Is this an email from Stan Welsh to you dated August 13th, 2008?
Yes, it is.
First question I have for you is, do you see the first line where it uses the term witch hunters?
Okay.
And what he's saying is, Eddie, if you can get the witch hunters to understand what should be done, you are the man. That's what he said, right?
Yep.
Do you see down below where he writes, and I quote, "This process needs to move a step or two away from Charles Crow and Rick Driver," end quote.
Uh-huh.
You have to say yes or no.
Yes.
Can we agree that you didn't really heed that advice?
That in what?
Heed that advice. Follow it.
Probably, because I probably did somewhat, yeah.
You believe that you did follow that advice?
Yeah.
That you moved the process a step or two away from Charles Crow and Rick Driver?
We were talking about 1.4 million transactions a year. There's no way you can check that many transactions. So we did spot checks, what we did as far as looking at stuff, you can't do an audit with that many transactions. It would just be too expensive.
I understand that you may have tailored the process differently, but you didn't move the process away from Rick Driver, did you?
Rick Driver has nothing to do with what we were doing as an audit.
In your view, did an audit need to be conducted in Anderson County as of August of 2008?
I think so, yes.
You believe that that was an important task to be performed?
Yes.
On August 13th of 2008, are you emailing Stan Welsh about the audit that you believe is important to Anderson County?
Yes. How to do it.
Is this 4 months before you would be sworn in?
Yes.
And you're discussing something that you view as important to Anderson County with a reporter?
Yes.
At some point during August of 2008, do you recall a lawsuit that Joey Preston filed against Bob Waldrop and Cindy Wilson?
I remember something about that.
Let me show you what we're going to mark as our next exhibit. Mr. Moore, is this an email from you dated August 14th of 2008?
Uh-huh.
Is it to Kelly?